Okay, so we're going to start by checking the PCV system, because if we have a hose that's not seated right, a restriction in the breather, anything along that lines will cause your issue. The first and foremost thing to look at would be this hose right here. This hose is our crankcase breather hose. So along the back side of the valve cover there, you're going to see this hose come around, and there's a sensor in that hose. Now, if that hose isn't plugged in or it's not seated correctly, it is going to cause this problem. So we're going to want to get a look at that hose and reseat anything that's damaged. If there's anything going on there, we want to get that fixed first. Okay. Now, while you're at that hose, it would be a good idea to check it electronically, because you're getting a code for it. Okay. So when you're at this hose, if everything's seated correctly, you're going to back probe this yellow wire with your voltmeter. Okay. Start up the engine, and with the engine running at idle, we should see about 3.7 volts on this wire. Back probed with the sensor plugged in. Okay. If you don't see that kind of voltage or close to that kind of voltage on that wire, make sure this yellow and blue is a good ground. Use a meter to check that. Don't load it. Just check its continuity to ground. Should be, around 2 ohms or less. And then let's check this yellow wire with the green tracer for reference voltage. Okay. If we have good reference voltage, we have a good ground, we got the wrong voltage on this wire, before we would suspect that sensor itself, we need to get to this breather right here. Now, this is our crankcase breather. If that was restricted, had a bunch of oil in it, or a bunch of hard oil that hasn't been cleaned out, if there was any kind of restriction in this breather at all, then we would not change our voltage on that sensor. So we would need to get to this breather, get these bolts out of it, and inspect the breather. Okay, clean it, blow through it, anything we need to do to make sure that that breather is flowing. Okay, if the breather's flowing well, and yet we're still not getting good voltage on this yellow wire, then we would want to replace this sensor. Now, that sensor is part of this little piece of tube. So this PCV tubing, that's part of the sensor. You have to buy that whole thing to get it. So we'd want to address that first. All of the codes you're getting suggest airflow issues. So my feeling is this hose probably isn't seated. One of these hoses is popped loose. So that's where I would go first. Also checking around your air cleaner for any loose tubes, an air filter that's plugged, anything that would affect airflow is the first thing I'd be looking at.